My wife used me like an ATM, making me pay child support for a child that wasn't even mine. She thought she had everything under control, until I decided to play by my own rules. She built her life on lies, but now it's all crashing down, and this is only the beginning of her fall. My name's Dan, I'm 32, and trust me, this isn't a story I'm particularly proud of. But as they say, honesty's the best policy, so let's cut to the chase. About 5 years ago, I met Linda. She was 28, I was 27, and it was like a lightning strike. She looked like the perfect girl who was going to turn my world upside down. And guess what? She did. Just not in the way I'd hoped. My first impression of Linda was perfect. Beautiful, smart, a sharp sense of humor, and she had those eyes that made me feel like she could read me like a book. It was one of those rare moments when you're sure, yep, I found the one. This is it, like in the movies. You know those scenes where two characters lock eyes across the room and sparks fly? That's how it felt for me. A couple of weeks later, we were going out on dates, and after a few months, we were already living together. Things were moving so fast, I didn't have time to notice any red flags. At the time, everything felt just right. I even called my mom and told her, "Mom, I think I found the one. I'm ready to hang up my player's hat." She laughed and said, "We'll see, Dan, we'll see." But I wasn't in doubt. I was all in. A year later, after we got married, things slowly started to fall apart. Not immediately, of course. It was more like a ship taking on water. You know there's a leak, but you're still convinced you can stay afloat. Linda started complaining about money, out of nowhere. We were never rich, but we weren't struggling either. I had a decent job, our life was stable, and things seemed fine. Then suddenly, "Dan, we need more money." And this wasn't a one-off conversation. It became a mantra. "Dan, you're not thinking about the future. Dan, we need to change things." I sat there thinking, what the hell? Everything's fine. We weren't rolling in money, sure, but we weren't drowning in debt either. We had a nice apartment, the car was running fine, and there was food in the fridge. Yet, all of a sudden, these money talks became constant, and she made it seem like money was the only thing that could fix our life. Naturally, being the fool I was, I tried to rationalize it. Okay, maybe she's just stressed. I should hang in there. But deep down, in the back of my mind, there was this nagging thought. Something's off. She didn't just want more money. She wanted more of something unattainable. This tension was building up, but as usual, I chose to ignore it. You know how when you have a toothache and you think it'll just go away? Of course it won't, but you keep pretending it will until the pain is unbearable. That was me thinking, it's just a phase. Linda will cool down. Then things got weird. Linda started disappearing in the evenings. At first it was supposedly for work meetings. Okay, I wasn't home all the time either. Work is work. But these meetings started running late. She'd come home later and later. That's when I really started to worry. But again, I was too confident in our relationship to admit something was wrong. I thought, it's just small stuff. I'm not going to jump to conclusions. And that was my first big mistake. Then, like a bolt from the blue, she announces, "I'm pregnant." Bam! I was in total shock. "What?" I asked, trying to process her words. We weren't even planning for kids. I mean, we'd talked about it for some time in the future, but definitely not now. And here we were. The first thing that crossed my mind was, how did this happen? But of course, I didn't ask that out loud. I'm not an idiot. I decided to accept it and thought, maybe it's fate. Okay, I'll be a dad. Linda acted like it was the best news ever, like I should be jumping for joy. I tried. I really did. I tried to get into it, but deep down, something was gnawing at me. Doubts and questions I couldn't shake. But once again, I did what I do best. I ignored it. Just kept going with the flow, not worrying. And that, my friends, was my first mistake. But as you'll soon find out, far from my last. 9 months later, our daughter, Ellie, was born. Now, in movies and books, this moment is usually described as magical. Childbirth, the first touch, joy, tears of happiness, all of it making life feel like it has new meaning. But sadly for me, it was more like, okay, what's happening? Ellie was adorable, a little angel, impossible to take your eyes off. But here's what I noticed almost immediately. Instead of feeling joy at being a father, I felt something else. Some strange, creeping tension. Within days of Ellie's birth, Linda turned into, well, let's call it something else. I'm serious. What she was doing clearly went beyond the usual post-birth mood swings. Every day she started with, "Dan, we need money for the baby. Are you even going to be involved in our life? All you do is ignore me." I sat there wide-eyed, trying to figure out where this avalanche of accusations was coming from. We were living fine. Sure, we weren't swimming in money, but things weren't bad enough for her to be yelling at me from morning to night. I tried explaining. "Linda, let's talk about what you need. Diapers? Formula?" But it turned out it wasn't about regular baby supplies. Oh no, she had a list of demands that grew by the day. And it wasn't about Ellie's basic needs. No, she wanted me to fund her spa trips, a new collection of bags, vacations to fancy resorts. And she didn't just want it. She demanded it, as if it was my obligation. "You need to take care of the family," she loved to say. And by taking care, she clearly meant funding her endless fantasies. If I ever tried to push back, she'd immediately fire back with, "Does anyone even care about your career? You think you can live off that?" It was a blow to the ego, no doubt. That's when it hit me. Something was really wrong here. These weren't normal conversations new parents have. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like Linda was plotting something. You know that feeling when you try to put two and two together, but all you get is some absurd math? That's exactly how I felt. Ellie was wonderful, no doubt. But Linda? Linda was clearly gearing up for something big. All these money talks, her constant demands, and endless complaints about how I was failing as a husband and father, it turned my life into a living hell. We started fighting over everything. It seemed like every conversation was another argument. And the worst part? I didn't even need to say anything to get blamed for something. She'd put on a show, accusing me of not doing anything for the family, when my only role seemed to be making enough money so she could keep up her endless shopping sprees and live like she was on some glamorous TV show. No logic, just pure pressure. Every day I felt this shadow growing over me, weighing me down, turning every moment of our life into a nightmare. And then, my friends, the real drama started. We got divorced. And it wasn't one of those quiet, peaceful divorces where people part ways with a smile and thank each other for the years together. Nope. Linda put on a full-blown spectacle. If they aired it on TV, the ratings would have been through the roof. She filed for child support, waving around the claim that Ellie was 100% my daughter. She screamed like her life depended on it. And of course, the court sided with her. I sat there, listening to it all, thinking, who's surprised? The judge looked at her, then at me, and ruled that I had to pay child support. At that moment, I didn't even have the strength to argue. All I wanted was peace. I was so exhausted from all the drama that I thought, fine, whatever, as long as it's over. So I started paying child support without even considering that the whole situation might have been one big scam. Over time, something started really bothering me. You know when everything seems fine, but there's that little voice in the back of your head whispering, "Hey man, don't you think something's off here?" Usually I'd ignore stuff like that, chalking it up to stress, exhaustion, or just paranoia. But this time felt different. Something just wouldn't let me shake it. Ellie. She was a beautiful little girl. But here's what I noticed. She didn't look anything like me. Now, I get it. Kids don't have to be carbon copies of their parents, but you'd expect at least some resemblance, right? I'm a brunette with brown eyes, and Ellie's this blonde-haired, blue-eyed poster child straight out of a Happy Childhood commercial. I kept coming up with dumb excuses in my head like, genetics are complicated. Maybe she takes after Linda's relatives. But the more I thought about it, the more that worm of doubt grew inside me. Meanwhile, Linda continued living her glamorous life, as if she were a character on some reality show. You know, the type of show where people don't work, just shop, go on vacations, and manage their lives through social media, pretending that's how normal life looks. For Linda, this was reality. Shopping every day, fancy dinners, constant trips, and all of it, of course, on my dime. And while she was living her fantasy, I felt more and more like an outsider in my own life. It was a really weird feeling. I'd sit on the couch, look at all this luxury, and think, is this even normal? Am I just invisible here? She didn't even notice me unless she needed something paid for or wanted to discuss her next necessary purchase. At some point, I started feeling like my only role in her life was to be her walking wallet. But the real mystery revolved around Ellie. She didn't look like me at all, and the more I stared at her, the bigger my doubts grew. Questions about why we didn't share a single feature were haunting me. But of course, I couldn't just sit Linda down and say, "Hey, let's do a DNA test because I'm starting to think something's not right here." That would have been a catastrophic mistake. Then one day, it hit me. I decided to secretly do a DNA test to avoid any drama. It felt like something out of a spy movie. I discreetly took samples, carefully sent them off to the lab, and waited for the results, like in a thriller. I figured I was probably just being paranoid, and soon I'd get confirmation that Ellie was indeed my daughter, and I could move on. But something inside me was telling me that wasn't the case. When the results came back, it was one of those moments where your life flips upside down. I stared at the papers, and my head literally started spinning. Ellie wasn't my daughter. At all. How could that be? 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind all at once. How? Why? What now? I stood there staring at the papers, repeating in my head, "What the hell?" My brain refused to believe what had just happened. For a few minutes, I just stood there holding that piece of paper, as if it weren't real. Shock, anger, disappointment, all mixed together in a chaotic mess of emotions. Linda had been using me this entire time like her personal ATM, and she played the role masterfully, like an actress with years of experience. That's when it hit me. If she could fool me, then I wasn't the first. What if her entire life was just one big scam, and I was just the latest sucker to fall into her trap? I started digging deeper, contacted some mutual acquaintances, and here's where things got even more interesting. Turns out, Linda had been pulling this stunt for a while. She'd done the same thing with other guys before me. She'd set up child support payments for kids who weren't theirs, and each time, she walked away scot-free, like it was her little hobby. She'd managed to scam both the system and these guys, leaving them high and dry. I was just the latest fool in her collection, and that hit my pride the hardest. So, I go to Linda, and this time it's not for a coffee chat or some casual visit. I've got the DNA results in my hands, and my heart's pounding like crazy. Adrenaline is rushing through my veins, my stomach's in knots, like it's the final round of a fight. Only this time, the fight is me versus Linda, and she has no idea her world is about to collapse. I knock on the door. For a few seconds, everything's still, and 1,000 thoughts race through my head. What if I'm wrong? What if it's all a mistake? But then she opens the door, and all my doubts vanish. Linda stands there, looking as calm as ever, with that smug smile, like she's got everything under control. Hell, she even looks like she just got back from another shopping spree or a glamorous trip, as serene as ever. I pull out the papers right away, not wasting any time. I wave the results in her face, like my trump card in the final showdown. Okay, Linda, care to explain how Ellie isn't my daughter? Or do you seriously think I'm that stupid not to notice? The words just fly out of me. I don't need to hold back anymore. Everything's out in the open. Then the circus begins. Linda pretends she has no idea what I'm talking about. It was like watching a stage performance. What? What are you even talking about, Dan? She even faked complete confusion, throwing in a bit of panic for good measure. And for a moment I actually thought, maybe she really doesn't know. But I saw the truth in her eyes. Her whole act unraveled right then and there. She was clearly panicking, but on the surface, she tried to hold it together. This was the moment when the manipulator's mask starts to crack, but they're not ready to take it off yet. I stepped closer, not giving her any chance to wriggle out of this one. Listen, Linda, Stop feeding me bullshit, I said firmly. Here are the results. Ellie isn't my daughter. So, either you tell me the truth now, or I'm taking these straight to court. And that's when the real fun began. Her face changed instantly. Here's your first lesson about manipulators. When you back them into a corner, they always lose their cool. They have no choice but to fold because there's no room left for another performance. Linda was right in that position. She made one last feeble attempt to dodge, muttering something like, "You can't be serious, Dan." But I already knew her game was over. Finally, under my pressure, she cracked. "Yes," she said through gritted teeth, not meeting my eyes. I knew Ellie wasn't your daughter." That was it. Just a few words, but they hit like a hammer. For a second I froze, processing what I'd just heard. So, that's what it was. All this time, she knew. She'd been stringing me along, playing the perfect wife and mother, while really just using me to fund her lifestyle. And for what? Some noble cause? For the child's happiness? No. For financial comfort, so she could keep up her boutique shopping trips and restaurant outings. The whole charade was played out just for her. I could almost understand if she was doing it for something greater. But no. It was all for her endless desire to live large, without giving anything in return. At that moment, I felt like I'd crossed a point of no return. Every feeling I'd ever had for her, love, respect, compassion, evaporated in an instant. All that was left was rage. I was standing in front of someone who'd used me from day one, like I was just a pawn in her game. But my friends, that game was over. Linda thought she could live like this forever. But as they say, everyone pays the price eventually. I no longer felt a shred of guilt. The only thing I knew for sure was that I was going to see this through to the end. She'd played me, but now I was going to make sure she paid for it. I decided that I wasn't going to be just another victim of her manipulation. This time, it was going to be on my terms. So, after Linda confessed that Ellie wasn't my daughter, there was no doubt left. I had to take things all the way. And how best to do that? Right, hire a private investigator. I found one through a friend. Yep, just like in the movies, only without the cheesy thriller plot twists. The guy turned out to be a pro. His name was Tom, and he looked like that old fox who'd seen it all. Tom got right on the case, and honestly, I was shocked at how quickly he started digging up dirt on Linda. Turns out, I wasn't just another pawn in her game. I was, in fact, one of many guys who'd fallen victim to her little scam. Linda had pulled this stunt several times before me. The pattern was simple and genius in its nastiness. She'd start a relationship, pretend to get pregnant, or actually get pregnant, then force them to pay child support. Once the guy was hooked, she'd switch to a new target and move on. And the craziest part? She managed to get away with it every time. How? By using different tactics to keep the system from catching on. When Tom started bringing me the evidence, I was blown away. It wasn't just a couple of guys she'd conned. There was a whole list of victims who'd been paying her for years, thinking they were supporting their kids. And the most disgusting part? None of these men suspected they weren't the fathers, because Linda was a master manipulator. I gathered everything. My DNA test results, Linda's confession, which I, by the way, recorded, just in case, and the testimonies from the guys Tom dug up. When it all came together, I realized this wasn't just a personal matter anymore. It was a massive fraud, and Linda was operating like a pro. But now I had all the cards in my hand. Tom, of course, was thrilled to take on a case like this. "Dude, she's got a whole career of fraud behind her. This is gonna be epic," he said with a grin. And you know what? I agreed. I was actually excited to see how she planned to wriggle her way out of this because now I was ready to go all the way and tear down her entire act. When I had all this evidence, proof of her scams, testimonies from those poor guys, the DNA results, I did what I should have done from the start. I filed a lawsuit. And not just to revise child support. No. I went all in and filed criminal fraud charges. Linda, being the drama queen she was, didn't back down and hired some flashy attorney. You know, the kind who thinks they can win everything with a smile and a couple of quotes from a law textbook. Her lawyer was clearly one of those who charge for every hand movement. He acted like they were about to win an Oscar for Best Courtroom Drama of the Year. But unfortunately for them both, the script was written against them. Because dude, when you've got all the cards, the game's obviously in your favor. Linda thought she could get out of it as usual. But this time her tricks didn't work. In court, I laid out all my cards. Just like the final scene of a show where the main character reveals all the secrets. The judge could barely hide his surprise when I presented the DNA results, the recording of her confession, and evidence of her other scams with those men. Linda sat there, acting like nothing was happening, and her lawyer tried to pretend this was all some big misunderstanding. Yeah, right. Like I just happened to have all this evidence by coincidence. The lawyer tried to steer the case in a different direction, saying it was just family drama, that nobody intended to deceive anyone. But honestly, the more he talked, the more it sounded like a desperate attempt to save a sinking ship. And I just stood there, watching them, thinking, you guys chose this path yourselves. The judge, of course, wasn't impressed with their theatrical performance. When I finished presenting the evidence, Linda couldn't weasel out of it anymore. Her attempts to defend herself only made things worse, because every word she said just added fuel to the fire. She didn't just get caught in her fraud. She practically drowned in her own lies trying to get out of it. The verdict? Complete exposure. Her lawyer looked like he wanted to leave and forget he ever represented her. Her cleverness that had worked for years finally turned against her. The judge gave his ruling, and Linda finally got what she deserved. The law was no longer on her side. So, the day of sentencing came. Linda didn't look so glamorous this time, without her expensive outfits and smug expression. The judge gave her that, I'm not putting up with this nonsense look, and when he read the sentence, I could feel a wave of triumph rising inside me. Linda is found guilty of fraud and sentenced to prison, the judge announced, and that's when I felt like the world had finally set itself right again. I watched Linda as she realized her grand plan had fallen apart. All those years of manipulation, deceit, and using child support to fund her shopping and trips to the Maldives, done. But the sweetest part? I was freed from paying child support. Yep, no more checks for someone else's kid. And that's not all. All the guys she'd scammed before me also got a chance to get their money back. Let's just say, Linda's on her way to prison, and she's also drowning in debt owed to her former victims. Karma? Absolutely. When I walked out of the courtroom, it felt like, okay, I did it. Mission accomplished. Not just because I'd won the case. It was a feeling of complete moral satisfaction. Justice had finally been served, and I was the one who got to witness it. Linda thought she'd outplayed everyone, but as they say, everyone has to pay the bill eventually, and her tab was long overdue. After Linda went to prison, I finally felt a sense of relief. You know that feeling when you drop a bag of rocks you've been carrying? That's exactly how I felt. Years of stress, manipulation, and drama, gone. No more fake child support, no more psychological attacks from her. Seriously, if someone had asked me to step up on stage and sing I Will Survive, I wouldn't have hesitated. But let's be real, it wasn't just a life got better and I started over moment. No, this was a damn important lesson I'd learned. Linda didn't just scam me. She opened my eyes to how easily you can fall into a trap if you let someone manipulate your emotions. I'm no longer the guy who falls for sweet words and big promises. New life? Yeah, I started one, but with an updated approach. You know, like in video games when you level up your character? Now I've got the never be a sucker again skill. No one's getting near my heart or my wallet with any more sweet-talking manipulation. As they say, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, you won't get the chance. Now I'm much more cautious and alert. The naive Dan who was ready to drop everything for a smile and a cute look, gone. Now I'm the guy who keeps his cards close and doesn't let anyone stick their fingers into my financial or emotional pie. I'll be honest, this experience made me tougher, but maybe that's how it had to be. Sometimes you've got to go through the crap to come out on the other side with a clear head. So now, I'm living with the lessons I've learned from my mistakes, and you know what? I like it.